for this morning, I chose John, the 11th chapter, the story of death of Lazarus. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and his sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "The sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you are going back there?" And Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." And Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world." And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and he is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he had been there for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did, put their faith in him. Here ends our reading for this morning. Now may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. You lay there motionless. It's dark, so dark, but still not dark enough. Sadly, your head is throbbing. Well, more than a throb, more than a nagging thump, but rather a pounding, that sledgehammer on a steel stake or that jackhammer on concrete pounding. Even the slightest noise hammers like a drum within your head. All the doors and windows are shut and the drapes are drawn tight. But still you can't do it. All you want to do is fall back to sleep or even die. It's your head. It throbs and throbs and throbs to the point that you try to stand up and you almost pass out. And on top of that, if you even think of food, your stomach suddenly twists into a knot and you instantly have to look for a basin. So you again close your eyes, beginning this time to pray. Father, please make this go away. Lift this pain from my head. Help me, Lord, please just take this agony away. Maybe you also remember mornings, afternoons, or long nights such as these. Times that you don't soon forget. The name for all this comes from the Latin word hemi, or half, and cranium, or skull. So when you put those two words together, today they are pronounced migraine. All of this describes those violent headaches which make you want to rip off half of your head just to ease the tension and make that pain simply go away. I still remember those long, long hours, those tedious days, those times that I had to suffer through it. Well, this sort of helps me picture what went through Lazarus' mind as he was laying there in that tomb, trapped inside those rolls of bandages, laying there motionless, unable even to budge. Can you even imagine the stench of odor that filled that stale air inside that grave? Now try to imagine him hearing that soft grinding sound penetrating into his aching head, as that stone began to be rolled away, all which caused a steady stream of light to begin to trickle into his darkness. Now try to imagine the numbness of his arms and legs as they now start to tingle, as his blood begins to slowly flow through his veins once more. This happening now as his heart begins to beat. And all the while, he then ponders what the heck is going on. As he lays there thinking, my journey I once thought was done is now beginning once more. Maybe imagine hearing that soft sound of people weeping over their loved one or their closest friend. Those you have gone from way too soon. Imagine hearing those outbursts of sobs as the paid mourners and stand off in a distance and continue crying loudly. All the while you also hear the soft mumbling of those men talking amongst themselves as this continues unwinding now before their very eyes. These men in their soft white robes standing there to see what yet happens. Can you imagine that smell of death? That fragrance of spices that would now begin to fill your nostrils as your lungs start to breathe in even more deeply with that rush of blood flowing now throughout your body. Maybe you can imagine that pounding of a headache and that soreness of a stiff neck and all the aching of your joints that haven't moved for days. All this because your much-needed rest, your eternal rest, suddenly has become interrupted by someone or something. Again, you suddenly now notice that overwhelming stench, this time becoming interrupted by a cool spring breeze as it replaces that stale air within your tomb. It's that spring breeze that you loved to smell as a child, that pleasant aroma right after a field of winter wheat has been cut. It always seemed to bring a new life to everything that had been lying dormant throughout those long winter months. Suddenly now, however, you are brought back to reality. What is happening? Who is that voice that you hear? That voice that has instantly brought movement back to your lifeless body. That voice you now recall hearing from those times he had visited you and your sisters over the last couple of years. Yes, that voice you remember now and will cherish forever. That voice that you have never seemed to be able to ignore. You unfortunately now are interrupted. Interrupted this time by hearing others crying, their wailing, their mourning, all those on the other side of that wall. But his voice, it cries out even louder and can never be forgotten or ignored. He speaks to you simply by saying those words, "Lazarus, come out." Suddenly you feel your heart begin to race even more. Excitement now stirring within your heart and veins. Life that now begins to flow further into your extremities. The very hairs on the back of your neck suddenly begin to stand up. This makes you recall now a time only 3 years ago when you first met this man. His voice, his face, all that you now hunger to see. That day you also felt this life, this sense of rebirth, this stirring within your heart and soul. Then, for the first time. Now you can hear deep breaths being drawn as you sense that all the people are standing outside your doorway, waiting now to see what happens, what becomes of this moment. You can feel the air filling with excitement as these seconds tick by. You can tell that they, the spectators, are filled with questioning and doubt at all as you have a million thoughts racing throughout your own brain. Suddenly now you have the strength to sit up. And instantly you hear your spine as it begins to crack and pop back into place. All from this lying still for so long. You lean to one side now and slide your bounded legs off that cold, hard stone bench, that platform you were unwillingly stuck to. Suddenly now you feel your weight slide down onto the floor and you hear the crowd outside continue to gasp from the noise that they now hear from this within your tomb. So you hop towards that opening. As the sun now streams into your eyes, you look out and you see him standing there, still focusing upwards towards his Father. You try, but you can't even seem to move fast enough through that doorway. Now you see your sister standing beside him, one off to the right, the other off to the left, but with mixed emotions of both sorrow and surprise, both with looks of trouble and of unspeakable joy. For now you stand for a second in that spring sun, feeling that cool, refreshing breeze continue to flow between your strangling bands of cloth, while the warm sun brings its rays onto your exposed skin. Yes, you recall those feelings you enjoyed when you rested for a couple of minutes while plowing the fields you tilled while growing up. That sun then beating warmth upon your suffering muscles. You continue now trying to twist and turn to free yourself from these cloth strips that are binding your body. Suddenly now tears begin to flow, filling your eyes as you look once more upon your sisters, your neighbors, those close 12 friends, his disciples, and especially upon the Lord himself. But sadly, you look off then to the distance at those other men in their robes. Those men who claimed to be your friends but thought only of themselves when it came right down to it. Those men you earlier heard whispering, those who are now staring and pointing at you. You then look away from them. You are instead filled with joy. You are filled with life once more. Death, it no longer has its grip on you. Death that has momentarily lost its sting. You are now filled once again with energy and excitement. Suddenly you hear your friend, your brother, your Lord talk once more. this time with both love and authority. Take off those grave clothes and let him go. Music to your once silent ears. Take off those grave clothes and let him go. As people suddenly are now beginning to circle around you and joyfully unwind those strips of cloth, those straps of death that no longer can bind you. As suddenly your sisters hug you and tears of excitement and joy flowing from their eyes. But now suddenly you stop. Once again, you have come face to face with the man. That man that just gave you new life. He also is excited to see the joy, but you also catch him staring past you now looking upon your empty grave. You can almost read his mind, a mind now concentrating on what his future still holds for him, actually only in a few days. He is deep in thought as he continues to study your once earthly grave, which he knows soon will be his. So can you hear Christ speaking to you this morning? Can you hear him telling you to also take off your grave clothes? Ask yourself, today, what grave clothes do you think you are still wearing? Maybe times in your life that you felt the same way that Lazarus did. Times you had migraines or sicknesses, or times you felt dead and buried in shame. Maybe times you felt tired and drained from living while going through tough times of life. Times the whole world seemed to be against you. Times when the cross you carried seemed to weigh 2.5 tons. Times when the stone you were buried behind would not seem to budge an inch. Maybe it's times like these that we feel run down, that we also need to understand what Lazarus' name stood for. His name, it meant he who God helped. Remember this, because times we feel as low as Lazarus was, it is then that we need to look for the same help his sisters sent for. It's these times we especially need to cry out to him for the help and support that comes from his loving arms. It's at these times that we need to lay down at his feet our sins, our pains, our fears, our weaknesses, and our trials. We need to look to him then for the strength, the wisdom, the love, the dreams, the future, and the joys he still wants to give each of us. God, he loves us enough to have sent his son to take our place on that cross of shame. Christ loves us enough to have sustained it all to the point of death. Done so he would be able to breathe a new breath of life into our dead nostrils. Christ, he was dead, but he then rolled that stone away and arose, giving us a new life. New life when we hand him our old. Do we ever feel tangled up like Lazarus did? Maybe bounded to the point that you know not which way to go? It is then that we need to turn to our Lord and let him free us of the sin that has confined and buried us so deep. It is then that we need to give him thanks for the love and mercy he graciously has shared with each of us. It is then that we need to return that love and glory to him, who righteously deserves our all after what he has freely done for us. Maybe this morning you still feel wrapped up in grave clothes. Maybe you feel bounded up by the burdens that you hold. Maybe if you just study the beat of your heart, you wonder if it even has any life within it. Maybe all you feel is death. We each have times in our lives when we feel that we have no life within us. We feel we have no purpose to be alive. But remember one thing. Christ died to give us life. He died so that we might truly live. Maybe today you are at a point such as Lazarus's. You also feel wrapped up in grave clothes. Clothes of doubt, of hurt, of past regrets, of loss of purpose, clothes of hunger for love, a hunger for a new life? If so, hand him your old. Hand him the burden you are fearful to release. Hand him your grave clothes and lay them in the tomb that he laid in for you. Let him breathe new life into you, just like he did for Lazarus. Just listen. Listen, because he cries forth now, calling your name. Child of mine, come forth. Come forth. Come to me, these loving arms that are stretched out for you, and truly be alive. Because he does it for each of us. He holds his outstretched arms of love for each of us. All we need to do is give him ours and grab hold to the arms that loves us most. Amen. Our closing song.